Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and we are back this week to talk about Episode 2 of House of the Dragon and the main differences between it and George R.R. Martin's book, Fire and Blood. If you're new to this series or new to the channel, you can check out the episode I did last week, which was for Episode 1, and I plan on doing this each and every week, just going through things that are being either changed or just differences, more details in the adaptation for House of the Dragon. And I want to give a really big shout out to everyone that tuned in last week. The numbers were great.
Would you start the damn video before I piss myself? 7
Okay,
hells.
I guess we will just go ahead and jump right into the video. And number 3 is going to be the war at the Stepstones, which I think we're going to see a lot of in Episode 3. And we have Crab Feeder. All that stuff was just excellent this episode. But one of the major differences is that we see King Viserys is very against going to war with the Free Cities in Episode 2 of House of the Dragon. In the books, it's never really explicitly stated that he's against this. In fact, just a little bit beyond where we are in the show in Fire and Blood, Viserys says, let Damon play at war. As long as he's not bothering me here at council, we are good. I do think that that could still happen in the show. I think that's a line that could be uttered in Episode 3 or 4, so be on the lookout for that. But in the book, it's never explicitly stated that he does not want a war with the Free Cities, that he fears it by any means, and that he's against sending Damon or Corlys down to the steps. So that is a big change because obviously we know that Damon and Viserys' relationship in the show is morphing into something a lot more complex and nuanced. But this is also an opportunity to bring Corlys Velaryon to the forefront, give him a voice in that small council. And he gets a little bit more in this episode as well with Laena and trying to offer her up as heir, which thank God that didn't work out. That was a bit awkward, definitely. But I like this difference, and I like seeing Viserys kind of struggle with this. It makes us question whether he believes in his own strength as a king. And it also puts Corlys Velaryon in a way more assertive role and sets up the scene we see at the end of the episode with Corlys going to Damon and saying, we must make our place. So it adds a little bit to the tension between Viserys and Corlys, and I think it's actually going to reaffirm some of the things we're going to see later in the season. So I like this difference. It's very small, but in a lot of ways major for Corlys Velaryon especially. Major difference number 2 will actually segue into number 1, but number 2 I wanted to talk about the stolen dragon egg. This is a difference from the book. Not so much the fact that Damon didn't steal an egg inside of Fire and Blood, but it was the fact that who went and retrieved it from Damon. That was a major difference, or at least a detail that was omitted. Essentially in Fire and Blood, Viserys says, hey, knock it off, Damon, return that egg, send Mysaria back to Lys, and we will be good. Otherwise, you're a traitor to the throne. And Damon actually tucks his tail between his legs and abides by this, sends Mysaria across the narrow sea, and then also gives back the dragon egg, and then that changes their whole relationship between Viserys and Damon. Here, though, this is expanded on, and we don't just see Damon tuck his tail between his legs. We see Rhaenyra land on that bridge. I mean, how cool is this scene? Landing on like that little bridge on the wall. And we see the showdown between the dragons. I thought that this scene was the most breathtaking of this episode. Maybe even possibly the best in the first 2 episodes totally. And what a great moment for Rhaenyra, especially an episode where we get a lot of dialogue between Rhaenys and herself, talking about women's roles when it comes to the Iron Throne and ruling and power. And then Mysaria also gets a little bit of a highlight after this scene, which I'll talk about as my number 1 change, just to give you a little heads up. But I love this for Rhaenyra. It's her making her own decision to go get the egg from Damon. And then we get an amazing scene where she says, if you would like to kill me, and this bothers you so much, feel free. If I am the bane of your existence and you want to be heir so bad, here I am. And it does a lot. It does a lot for Rhaenyra. This is where I really, as a show watcher, am believing in Rhaenyra, the character, and I thought it was really powerful. I also love the fact that there's clearly more to Damon than just wanting to be heir because he cares about Rhaenyra. That is evident. And I think they're laying a lot of groundwork for later scenes in the show. And I thought that this difference in adding Rhaenyra, making the choice to go and retrieve the egg, was great for her character and overall her relationship with Damon. And then after this, we go into the number 1 difference for me in episode 2 of the House of the Dragon. That is Mysaria. Damon in the books has stolen the egg because he wants to give it to a pregnant Mysaria, which Mysaria is much different in the book. She is a little bit older. She definitely has a lot more mystery around her. Right now, I'm getting like Shay vibes in the actual show compared to Game of Thrones, but she's definitely aged down in the show, and I think that she is going to play a different role, or maybe just more of a major role. In Fire and Blood, like I mentioned in point 2, she's sent back to Lys, and she loses the baby. She never gives birth. It's this terrible thing, and Damon, while not showing grief, this is kind of when he begins to harbor really negative feelings towards Viserys, even through everything they've been through to this point. Well, we don't see Mysaria sent across to Lys, right? And we also don't see her pregnant. She's not pregnant. And I think this is maybe an indicator that she's going to have a major role to play later. I don't think they're just going to take this actress and throw her out. I think that she's going to have a bigger role to play. And I think as we go forward, and this is a prediction, so we can come back to this later in the season and we can say how wrong I was, but I have a feeling Mysaria is going to play a much different and more powerful role in the show than she does in Fire and Blood. She does have things to do in the dance, but I will not spoil that for those who have not read on in Fire and Blood yet, or those who are waiting to be surprised in the show. But I think the conversation that Damon does have with Mysaria is very in tune with the rest of the episode, because we hear Rhaenys, we hear Rhaenyra, we see Alicent being forced into positions, and these are all ladies that are in noble families and are in power. But Mysaria really balances out this theme of this episode of where are women in this world of Westeros by showing us someone who doesn't have name recognition, that isn't even in any sort of power. And she came to Damon because she's tired of being afraid. I think that we're going to see that explored a lot more with her character, and I expect her to be one of the bigger changes and the bigger differences and be a real impact player going forward in House of the Dragon. I'm also going to be keeping my eye out to see if Mysaria gets pregnant later, because since she's not sent away, I feel like her and Damon's relationship is actually going to stay constant, which would also be a change from Fire and Blood since she's not being sent away at all. So do you think that Mysaria will end up pregnant in the show? Let me know down in the comments below. I thought episode 2 was absolutely fantastic. I actually enjoyed it more than episode 1, if you're wondering about my general thoughts. The 3 differences that I went over were all pretty good. There wasn't a ton of action in this episode, but this is the groundwork we have to have and the dialogue that we need to make the bigger payoff scenes later in the season really mean something. And this is something that the later seasons of Game of Thrones did not do well. So to see them be able to take an episode full of dialogue and really build something gives me a lot of confidence in the writing team. I don't think necessarily that it was a perfect episode, but I like what I saw, and it gives me a lot of confidence going forward. And I do believe as we go, and especially as we get into more of the action-y episodes later in the season, I do think that the differences between the show and the book are to become wider and more apparent, and I think it's going to give us a lot to talk about. So these videos will probably actually get a little bit longer in the future. But this was a fun episode to kind of rest and just pick apart little things and see how they're playing with the nuances of characters and giving people a little bit more of a role and seeing like Corlys come to the forefront, Mysaria get some really great lines. Thought it was excellent, and I'm really, really happy with the differences so far. Also, just a little detail that they put into the show that's not in the books I wanted to mention was the fact that apparently Vhagar's missing. She's not missing in the books, so the fact that she is going to come back, like a dragon's going to enter the show at some point, is going to be a major moment, and I think that they could play with that and make it really, really dramatic. So keep an eye out for that. I will be back next week, probably a little bit later in the week, with an episode 3.
Why in the hell is it later in the week?
Well, I have some things going on earlier in the week, but I do intend to put out a differences video for episode 3 in the book. Relax, Bobby. Relax.
Don't tell me to relax, you nerd.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll get you a cup of mead and you'll be good to go. I want to thank you so much for taking your time to check out this video. If you want to see more like it, go ahead and hit subscribe. Hit like if you enjoyed the video. If you dislike it, you can dislike it. I'll be back each and every week to go over the differences between Fire and Blood, the source material, and House of the Dragon as a show. I love A Song of Ice and Fire, and I'm having a blast doing these videos, so I'd love to have you along for the ride. There is a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe. Remember to always keep turning the page. I want to give a big shout out to my Kingsguard, which are my top tier patrons, which include Lauren, Henrik, Kai, Simon, Oscar, Stuart, Josephine, Ikaika, Amanda, who is the lore master, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Tanner, Jennifer, Garrick, Frank, Evie, Fever, Jay, Sarah, Pat, Kevin, Ryan, Michael, Terrence, Wade, Darren, My Book is Lit, Dairy, John C., Bass, Mitch, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Welcome to My Mind, Noel, Amanda L., and Kyle, and C. Scott. Thank you all so much. You're the best.